there, I'm Dean Walker, and I'm the founder of a number of different elements that if you're in the collapse-aware community, you've already possibly stumbled into some of them. One of them is a podcast, The Poetry of Predicament, which is a YouTube channel that I've been running for about 6 years now. Also our website, which is called livingresilience.net. And the third is a recent addition to the body of work, which is more of a community space on a platform called Mighty Networks. And that is Living Resilience also. And it is, I call it the community space. And so if you're watching this video on the podcast, the Poetry of Predicament podcast, welcome. I'm a familiar face to you, and you know what these podcasts are about, really to bring together thought leaders, to interview people who have something to say about how to have a functional life in the face of a predicament-laden time. You may, if you've been to the website in the past couple of years, and especially if you've just come into our newly formed community space, all of which, by the way, all the links for all these things are down in the show notes. You'll know that we have been offering for quite some time online learning series. You'll have encountered some of our introductory series that really help a person who's new to the collapse-aware conversation. What's going on? Oftentimes people will approach this work just having a strong feeling in their gut that things are not right, but they don't necessarily have strong information to back it up. And God knows, in this insane world in which truth is no longer a wanted commodity, it is truly a post-truth world. And so it can be a relief for people who are new to this conversation to be able to find a place where they can be oriented toward strong evidence-based materials to back up what that gut feeling has been telling them for quite some time. What we hope to also do is offer a number of ways you can find support. You can find support groups. We have our ongoing weekly safe circle calls. Again, the information about that will be down in the show notes, and you can come and join us in either of the weekly calls that we offer. And there are many other kinds of support groups or special focus groups, especially in the public space, where you can take a course with other people. You can engage in a book club with other people with a special focus that's obviously related to one of the collapse-aware themes. And of course, we have moved, we're in the process of moving our coursework to the community space as well. And all of these will have clusters of people who are, again, a special focus interest group. What we're really excited about the community space, the Mighty Networks space for Living Resilience. That's the Living Resilience is the name of the body of work. It really is a time for us to find our people, to find people who have a similar interest and who have a similar desire to expand our capacity to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors. Let me talk to you just a minute or two about what's the purpose of this work. What's our mission, if you will, or vision? And it really comes out of, for about the past 10 years, I'm speaking to you in 2022. So it's actually been about 12 years since I went from being an ongoing, since I was a teenager, very, very interested in, urgently interested in environmental concerns. But I have to tell you that my earliest mentoring in that arena, really all the way consistently through, has been that there's very, very little hope of turning around the ecocidal nature of our systems And so what I discovered was in 12 years ago was that all the things that I knew were coming eventually, I had my woke moment, if you will, of how much sooner it was happening and with far more ferocity than my worst imaginings had been. So it was at that point that I started to turn my attention toward really researching, really finding out just how urgently, how accelerated the pace of this destruction of our biosphere is going. Um, and I vetted that material in 2014 and turned my attention to, it just turned me around. It just had me realize that there was no longer any time to do anything else for me. It was my time to really be of service to life. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I wanted to bring whatever gifts I have that could be of interest or could be useful out of a lifetime of doing transformation-based training work with people, empowering people to work well together and to do deep inner exploration in order to be more and more empowered in their relationships and their work and so on. So there was some of that. There's some video production work, some a tremendous number of decades of psychospiritual practices that, ironically, as I've discovered, these turn out to be the beating heart of this offering of living resilience. So let me give you the brief, let me give you the now longer version of the elevator pitch for living resilience and see if this starts to make sense. And that it's our intention to offer transformative support, resources, and practices to people bravely facing human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. That's the elevator pitch, and it officially applies. I've timed it in between elevator floors, and it works. We've even got a shorter one now, and that is that we're offering profound resources facing troubled times. And this is where the psychospiritual resources, the decades of studying energetics, decades of studying a land-based and oftentimes a shamanic background of wisdom tradition, of non-traditional knowledge. It's actually quite traditional in the ancient sense, but not the customary kind of academic background that one might have when offering empowerment, training, and support. So one thing that you're going to bump into if you decide to take one of our introductory courses or almost any of the initial offerings that a person can encounter here in the Living Resilience public or community space is you're going to see a self-assessment tool. It's the first of many of them. And the idea is for you to position yourself on a stages of awareness ladder that is roughly based on similar stages of awareness model that was put together by a Canadian blogger by the name of Paul Chafurka. So a big shout out and appreciation to Paul. And we've adjusted it and adapted it a bit. And what it basically starts out with is the business as usual world, the world we all know, the world we've all been immersed in for all of our lives. And the vast majority of people on the planet, if there are, 8 billion people on the planet, then probably just under 8 billion will continue to stay there. Will always be there, are saturated in that. That's all they know. It's just basically continuing the cycle of daily living that we've known in our lifetimes. Nothing wrong with that. That's just kind of the facts. And it's also the way that, again, this guy, Paul Chafurka, and then we here have adapted this model. So the vast majority of people not only us as well, everybody else I'm going to talk about is saturated in the business as usual model as well. What's different is that something separates us from that larger mass of people, and that's often an insight. It's often some sort of event that has us realize that something's not right about continuing this daily cycle of what we've always known, that there's something quite wrong with that system, something existentially wrong, wrong at an potentially existential or extinction level. So the first level above that, the first step above business as usual, I often call that the stage of having one problem, one thing. It affects us strongly enough for us to realize that something's not right. So that was something we use quite often here. I joke that there's a mental health professional here in the USA named Mike Tyson, who actually happens to be a boxer as well. And he has a saying that everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Basically, everybody's doing just fine and has their plan for life and business as usual until some major event comes and smacks them. I certainly have had my share of figurative punches in the face from the universe, if you will. And so I left the enclosure of business as usual quite a while ago. I'm still immersed in it. I still spend much of my day in it, and it still takes immense amount of energy on my part to bring my attention out and my intent out into other dimensions. And those other dimensions, as you're going to see, imply a more and more systems thinking and a systems awareness, which is going to tell us that in beyond that one problem, that is that punch in our figurative face, wake us up, have us realize there's some other way that we need to be in this planet. There are other things we need to be attending to, and things need to change. And as you go further up in that progression, it starts to, well, the first level I often call first aid level resilience. And millions of people around the planet in the past couple of years alone have had that kind of experience. Whatever their orientation before, they've been victimized by fire in their region, or a hurricane, or floods, or droughts, wars, pandemic. There are certainly a lot of destabilizing events that have happened at scale. What the resilience skills that are called for, each level of this has a level of resilience skills that we would suggest for that as well. And at this first step out of business as usual, called out the first aid level resilience skills. And really the best that one could hope for, one that usually one is hoping for at this point, is a phrase that's become very popular in these past couple of years. How can I, as soon as possible, get back to normal? Get back to business as usual, get back to life as usual, get my legs back underneath me after this hurricane devastation, and so on. And there's nothing wrong with that. These are vitally important skills that are trainable, teachable, transferable. This is a part of many, many disaster relief efforts around the world. We bring a tremendous amount of focus and offer a tremendous amount of resources to people at this level. Often, again, this is the entry level to this whole collapse-aware conversation. It may well be that this is as far as someone goes in this work, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is a strong and important body of work and a skill set. And it's one that if I'm not a parent, but I have certainly been engaged with parents in youth programs for decades. I would recommend this highly to every parent, to have these skills in your pocket of what's called self-regulation and co-regulation. The ability to bring myself back to a sense of center and a sense of awareness and I'm being present in my body and present with the people I love around me, which if we've just encountered a large-scale disaster, it can be something that literally knocks us out of our awareness of being in our body. It takes our consciousness away from where the people we love and the things that are important right now. So again, first level of resilience skills that we offer here. And for many, this might be as much as far as they go in this trajectory. And they're certainly welcome at any time to come on in and join us for the resources that we have for that. The next level is if we've encountered ourselves in that hurricane devastation of our neighborhood and we're sleeping with 50 other families in the high school gym and so on, that what can also happen is that a person can have an awakening to this kind of thing. Sounds like it could happen again. It's happening more and more. I wasn't aware of it before, and I'm not going to let this happen at this. I'm not going to be unprepared like this again. I'm going to do what it takes to expand my capacity to be present and prepared as best I can for future increases in the size and scale of the stressors that are coming at me and my family and my loved ones. So this whole arena, this kind of midway point on that progression, that scale that I was talking about, I call this the practices of reconnection level. And where that phrase comes from is what we assert got us here into this global predicament, into this human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems, is that we've disconnected from all the primary sources of relationship and meaning in a human life. It's a bold statement. It's impossible to go into it in depth in this brief video, but there's plenty of threads you can pull to get a deeper understanding of what we're saying with that. The gold nugget at the center of it at this point is what if we disconnected from all the primary sources of meaning and relationship in a human life. And on top of that, the business as usual model incentivizes those who have most fully disconnected. Look for yourself. What would a society look like if we had the people at the top, the people with the most money and power, were the people who were most disconnected from other people, from their own inner wisdom, their own connection with the earth? If those were the people that we most richly incentivize in this culture, in this global business as usual culture, what would it look like? I think we can all just take about a 5-minute look at the news cycle on any day at any time, and we'd see that's exactly what it looks like now. So at the other end of the scale, if we know that that's harmful, if we know that it's going in a bad way with those people in charge, what on earth can we do, you and me, when we get out of bed in the morning and we put on our pants one leg at a time? We're just folks. How do we get out of bed and feel like we can just make the world a little bit of a better place each day? That's the level at which we're talking about, at the practices of reconnection level, practices to reconnect us with our inner sensitivities, with our inner wisdom, which is formidable, which there are records of indigenous peoples around the world who have existed without destroying themselves in our fashion. They've lived together successfully and fruitfully for thousands of years. So that's just one example of a type of, or a way of describing these practices of reconnection that each person comes up with here for themselves. Yours will be different than mine. That's just the way it is. You know, what matters most to me is not necessarily what matters most to you at any given moment. And that's what we're basing our own choices for practices of reconnection on. The good news is they may be different, but we can sit in circle together. We can be supportive of one another. We can share our practices with one another. And most importantly of all, there are certain practices that of course, there are many I have to do alone. I have to be responsible for in my own learning and growing and expanding in that. But there are certain number of these practices, types of practices that I need other people. I need to sit in circle with capable, trained other people who can bear witness and help me see that which I cannot easily see in myself. There's that kind of work, and you can already get a sense that this is a progression, and that people who take it on more sincerely and more deeply, these are practices that can take a while to really deepen. The benefit is hard to overstate. If a person lands here and for the rest of their lives takes on these kind of practices of reconnection to expand their capacity to be present and of service to the people they love in their lives, again, the benefits are just hard to overstate. Again, I know I'm moving quickly, but there's so much more about this in the various programs that we offer and events that we produce and support circles and so on that we offer. So I hope you'll dig around and find out more if you're at all interested in this so far. There's one last level in this progression that I'd like to speak about. It's slightly different than how Paul Czafurka talks about it. But I would say that if a person has gone quite a ways into the practices of reconnection, and they've sincerely engaged with these practices, what they're going to start, I call it tasting more and more of, is this shared, remarkable, expansive, a sense of deep connection with other people, deep connection with Earth and the web of life itself, deep connection with inner sensitivities that back in business as usual, they were disincentivized. And that starts to push us toward, just gently nudge us toward what I call the transformative. And it's also another term you'll hear over time is the implicit. And what I can share with you at this point is it was really through a number of different profound experiences in my psychospiritual practices over decades, and particularly one in which I was in quite a serious accident. I was in a boating accident that nearly cut off my leg. And I was in a recovery process and staying with my parents. I was an adult at the time, and I was taken care of by my parents. And it was the most extraordinary time of connection that we've ever had. So there were these, here's the punchline. I healed just fine. It was miraculous healing. It was the best connection, deepest connection I've ever had with my parents, and who are now passed away. And at the center of it all, in this approximately 7 months straight, I had access to an experience that I've checked in with people who are very familiar with and adept in the wisdom traditions from around the world. And it seems to be a very common experience for those who are adepts, deep adepts of those wisdom traditions. And I could call it Satori. I could call it, it's not quite nirvana, but it is an expansive state of unity consciousness and unity with and connection with truly life itself. It's an extraordinary, ineffable state. Here I am trying to explain it. And that implicit, it implies the implicit senses, which again, you'll hear me say more about this. You'll always see me designate this central part of my body, which is where I assert that this is where it resonates in us. And when we're aware of it, when we cultivate that awareness, again, the punchline, because we need to finish up this brief introduction to the core of this work. These times are like no other in human history. They are literally existential in nature, potentially existential for humanity, for all I know. I personally don't see that happening, at least not soon. But I do see massive impact, massive trauma, massive loss of human life, and massive, what's already extinction level loss of so many different wild animals around the world. We will see that continue. In the face of that scale of challenge, of predicament, and the many, many problems wrapped all the way around that predicament, what can we call on in ourselves? What are the inner strengths and resources that we can call on in ourselves? I would assert that our ability to do good sense making and then good choice making in these times is virtually disabled, like crippled, cut down to the quick. So there's some amount of sense making training and working together to build out our abilities to do good sense making that must happen. There are other types of practices of reconnection that I would recommend highly. And there's the list in each of those dimensions of deeper self, others, and earth are many. The list items are many that we could take on as practices. One that I would suggest highly for us all is to learn how to hold space for others in circle. Means, how do I be present? How do I participate in a good way in a support group? And eventually, how do I start to hold the space in that group instead of just being a passive participant? How do I actively hold space for others? And finally, if you're a parent, if you're in any kind of organization, or if you have a work group, if even in your intimate one-on-one relationship, you will likely be called on to be able to lead, to be able to facilitate, to be able to hold space for others in this kind of support group setting. People are going to need one another. And remember, the vast majority of people will be back in the business as usual milieu. And there's very little in the way of cultivating or expanding capacity to be present or to be more effective, to be of service to the people we love back in the business as usual world. So these, again, are just a couple of examples of practices of reconnection, and also the transformative practices of reconnection that can have us access what I believe is the only inner resource that's available to all human beings that comes close to being at scale effective at helping us face these problems, these challenges, these global scale human caused predicaments. This inner resource that I'm talking about now, and I'm about to repeat what the name of it is, in my experience, this implicit, this connection with the expansive experience of being integral, an integral part of this web of life, this implicit is the only inner resource at scale that we have that stands a chance of facing the immensity of the scale of the predicament that we've created. That's why we do this work. That's what we're about here. Now, if this has turned out to be just a little bit too heavy, because I know this is extraordinary. This is like no other time in human history. I'd like to just, if you're new to this conversation, and heck, if you've been around this conversation for a while, hopefully you know what I'm about to say. There's also an extraordinary light here. the other side of that, what can be a very daunting and heavy part of the conversation I just talked about, the other side of the implicit, why it's called transformative, is that it is the place where we connect in the most cherished, nourishing, and important ways human beings have ever connected. This is where we connect with other human beings when we are loving them, when we are experiencing being loved. This is truly as nourishing and as astounding and miraculous and as beautiful as it is daunting when we're facing it from the perspective of business as usual. I invite you to come and get a taste of this work. Yes, it's hard when it's hard, and the scale of it can be daunting. But we, as much as possible, balance out that experience with the depth of connection and mutual love and appreciation. And, we're all just folks that, again, just get out of bed each morning and want to bring just a little bit more love and a little bit better living to ourselves and to the people around us. I hope you'll come and join us in exploring what are the dimensions of this work. Look forward to meeting you.